Welcome to Unspun Live, the Herald's politics podcast. I'm Rebecca McCurdy, the paper's deputy political editor. After weeks of non-stop election campaigning, we finally have the results. The SNP are the largest party in Holyrood by a significant margin, winning 58 seats. Reform and Labour are joint second, both with 17 MSPs each. The Scottish Greens had a record result, 15 MSPs. The Tories fell to 12, and the Lib Dems increased their representation to 10. Crucially, though, the SNP fell short of that desired majority, which John Swinney said was needed to be a mandate for independence. I'm joined by the Herald's political correspondent, Hannah Brown.
Hello.
Hannah, take us through the numbers, because together the Greens and SNP have a pro-independence majority.
Yes.
That's the largest number of pro-independence MSPs the Parliament's ever seen.
Yes.
But what about vote share? What are the numbers telling us?
So that's really interesting. So the headline is that the SNP are still dominant, 58 seats, comfortably the largest party, but they've clearly taken a hit on vote share. You know, if you look at the pro-independence side, the SNP and Greens together are sitting at around 41% of the vote, which is down from just under 50% in 2021. So there's a bit of a paradox here. They still have a parliamentary majority, but the underlying support has actually dropped quite sharply. And we, if we look at the vote share across the board, we also saw the Tory vote share fall by 10.1% and Labour 2.4%, just looking at the figures here, with Reform sweeping up most of those seats as well.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about the pro-independence majority is that I think the last 5 Holyrood terms have had a pro-independence majority. Mm-hmm. We've seen that has never led to independence or to another independence referendum. The only thing that has is that 2011 majority that Alex Salmond secured. Mm-hmm. And so I suppose the one thing that now John Swinney has to answer is how do you get there? Because you've promised your voters that and your supporters that. And to an extent, this is, with it being the largest pro-independence majority, there is that, I suppose, hope within the movement that they can then use that. But what do you think? Because it seems like it's just going to be more of the same where they can't get it.
And it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you've promised your support base that, if you got that 65 seats, that would be a mandate. Well, John, what is your mandate now? It raises an important question about that mandate stuff, because yes, when we see these numbers, there's still a pro-independence majority in Holyrood, but we've had that before and it hasn't translated into a referendum. And, we also need to bear in mind the UK government's position hasn't shifted. Yep. Some might argue it's actually strengthened and saying absolutely not. So, the real question for John Swinney is, does a shrinking vote share weaken the political argument, even if the seat numbers are still there?
Yeah. So I was with John Swinney on Saturday as he held this kind of victory rally. And the one thing that stood out to me was this Celtic fringe that he was talking about. For the first time, we're going to have pro-independence. The largest parties in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland are going to be led by pro-independence parties, so Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland and Plaid Cymru in Wales, and of course the SNP here in Scotland. And I got the sense that is maybe the thing that could bring it all together. That John Swinney said the Celtic fringe has always been used as a kind of derogatory, patronising term. Mm-hmm. Well, now the UK government have to address it, because there is this movement, and it seems to me like that is the one thing that maybe John Swinney could use to his advantage. We've never had these 3 parties able to team up in this way before. So, I think it'll be really interesting.
100%. And it's that idea of, okay, Westminster, he does now, because, your leading governments are those parties. So, it's going to be difficult for anyone who is in charge at Westminster. I'm sure we'll get onto that. But anyone aside from Keir Starmer, if there is a new leader for the Labour Party and at UK level, they'll need to, face up to these new governments who are leading that sort of anti-status quo, pro-independence, lead in different areas of the country.
Yeah. And then you were with Reform on Saturday, with Malcolm Offord and his new cohort of MSPs. What was the mood like? Because there was some suggestion that they maybe didn't do as well as they were hoping to do. They didn't do that well in constituencies. Was there a sense of that, or was it just like emphatic, we did really well?
No, there was a sense of it. There was less of a sense of it once Malcolm Offord had time to sleep on it. Before I spoke to him on Saturday, he was saying to other kind of outlets and broadcasters that he was actually quite disappointed in the result. He wanted that sort of mid-20s MSP seat projection. That's what he was aiming for. So to get 17 was a bit of a disappointment. Now, I posed that to him. I said, Malcolm, are you still disappointed? And he said, well, I've had a time to think about it, and actually this is momentous. Going from nowhere to 17 MSPs is momentous, is what he said to that. And crucially, it's that 16.5% share of the vote as well that they got. So, I mean, a mix of slight disappointment, I guess, the night before when all the results were coming in. But now there's a real momentum, I guess. They've had time to sleep on it and go, actually, what we've done here is pretty good. And what they were saying is we just didn't have enough time to get those constituencies. But next time round, watch us roar, because we're coming back and we're going to do really well. So the way in which Reform, I guess, are shaping this is, we are the new kids on the block. This is our first time round, and this is only a stepping stone. And I think how Malcolm Offord and Thomas Kerr, his new deputy, worded it to me was, wait till you see us in 2031.
I mean, looking to 2031 is really interesting, because on Saturday, John Swinney announced a strategy of, we are a minority administration, or we are going to be a minority administration. And he said he's going to invite all the leaders of all the opposition parties around the table to discuss the next steps and how they do government. But crucially, he's going to exclude Reform and Malcolm Offord. It kind of came across to me as a move that could really, really backfire. I don't think we could ever expect, the SNP and Reform to be agreeing and to be doing deals, or, really finding much common ground on anything. But I wonder how excluding them really, what that says to I think it was like something like 400,000 people in Scotland voted for them. To exclude that many people who have put them there. It seems like it could, by the time 2031 comes around, really kind of mobilise a lot of people and make them think, you will listen to what we have to say.
Completely. And I guess it's a difficult situation for John Swinney to find himself in. He's trying to argue himself as the contrast to Reform. He needs to politically, in his eyes, lock them out, because he can't be seen as siding with him. But what it does for Malcolm Offord is it gives him a potential opportunity. Well, it gives him an opportunity to go, hang on, you cannot deny the voices of hundreds of thousands of people who have voted for Reform. And I actually think, excluding Reform from cross-party talks is risky. Like I said, politically, definitely risky, but politically it makes sense. John Swinney said there's no common ground. We can't find any common ground with them, but strategically it plays straight into their narrative that they represent voters being shut out of the system. And given they've just brought in those hundreds of thousands of votes, as we've talked about, that's quite a powerful message for them. But I would say, just on Reform, the challenge for them is now to mobilise what I would say has been an angry protest vote. They've pulled support from the Conservatives, from Labour, and also people who've basically disengaged from politics, right? The challenge is now is that protest politics is easy in a campaign, right? It's much harder inside the Parliament that runs on committees, scrutinies and legislation. They've got these inexperienced folk that are coming in. All of them, bar one, Graham Simpson, have never been in Holyrood, have never been parliamentarians or politicians. Politicians, some being Thomas Kerr. But they have got a lot of work to do to get used to kind of the rigmarole, to get used to how Holyrood operates, and they have to mobilise that angry protest momentum that they've had in the campaign into something that will actually be deliverable and effective as a strategy.
what's interesting about Malcolm Offord, so of course he was a minister in Boris Johnson's government in the Scotland office, but he doesn't bring with him much. He likes to tell everyone he's not a politician. And John Swinney was asked about this on Saturday. Do you think that Malcolm Offord will see out the full term? And all the SNP MSPs in the room kind of laughed at this, and John Swinney's response was basically like, of course not, he doesn't seem that interested. But I wonder if that's just kind of wishful thinking on John Swinney's part, because there is this real movement, I think, whether John Swinney likes it or not, you can't really ignore that. And I think that there is the absolute risk here that I think, like you say, there's never going to be common ground. I don't see them ever actually having worked with them, but I think by not inviting Reform around the table, it's just really an open goal, I think, for Reform. But like you say, it was a lose-lose, I think, situation.
And it's also difficult because John Swinney will just be hoping when this Parliament reconvenes as it's doing, that Reform will basically destroy itself. That's what John Swinney is really hoping, that as soon as we get into those parliamentary sort of discussions, committees, chamber business, he'll be hoping that the inexperience potentially shines through. We'll maybe have more scandals, more controversy coming out of those Reform MSPs. He's hoping that the party destroys itself before he even needs to step in.
Yeah. What about Labour? Speaking of parties that might destroy themselves, there's chaos is one way to put it.
Totally.
Neither Keir Starmer or Anna Sarwar look like they are going to be the ones to step aside, but the pressure is mounting. Somebody, it seems, needs to take responsibility here for what can only be described as a disaster across the UK in these local elections. You spoke to Jackie Baillie after she won her seat in Dumbarton. I think there was concern from Labour that she might lose it, but she did win it. But did you get a sense that she was kind of like relieved to have won the seat, but also like, oh my God, what has just happened to my party?
She was totally relieved. And I also think it's quite interesting that there was all this talk, Dumbarton's always been that kind of seat on a knife edge for Labour. It's always been quite a nervy battle for them. But, Ross Greer was also at that count, and he said to me, Jackie Baillie is the great survivor of Scottish Labour. She just happens.
She's going to be the last one there.
Completely. And actually, when we thought that was going to be really close to call when the votes were coming in, actually she almost doubled her majority there. So I think she's relieved on a personal level that she managed to hold on to Dumbarton and almost double her vote share. But then what's really striking from people like Jackie Baillie is the tone. She openly said to me that the party has a job of work to do, and that they were distracted by what was happening at a UK level. And today we heard from Keir Starmer, so we're recording this on Monday, the 11th of May. Sorry, I'm losing track of my dates. It's been a long few weeks. But Keir Starmer today, in his major speech, he was very clear. He said he takes responsibility for what he called tough results, but he's absolutely not going anywhere. That's what his message was. Now, whether or not we believe that remains to be seen. But the problem for him is that the pressure is now coming from inside the party. MPs openly talking about leadership challenges, senior figures saying what Labour is doing just isn't working. And in Scotland, it's even more acute. Labour on 17 seats, joint second with Reform, way below expectations, and that's starting to hurt folk like not just Keir Starmer, Jackie Baillie and Anna Sarwar. We've got folk like Brian Leishman, their MP, basically saying that they should absolutely step down, resign.
Yeah, you had so before this election, we'd only ever had two Scottish Labour MPs, Brian Leishman and Ewan Steinbank, call for the Prime Minister to go. Last night, like you say, we're recording this on Monday, but last night we had Irene Campbell, an MP for Ayrshire, I believe. She said basically she'll wait and see what Starmer had to say this morning, but she wanted a kind of timeline in place over by the end of the year of how the party was going to replace the Prime Minister. So it does seem like, there really is something happening here now, but it also makes me wonder, like, what took so long, for the Scottish Labour MPs. It will be really interesting to see how many more come out, if at all, and then if they don't, why not?
Yeah, and before we recorded this, Rebecca, we were talking about the fact that, does Scottish Labour have to distance itself even further now from Westminster, or does it try to carve out more of a distinct identity, or is it a bit too little too late for that? Anna Sarwar would argue he tried his best in this campaign to basically distance himself from Keir Starmer, but at the end of the day, when you speak to voters, when you speak to those disgruntled Labour voices, they blame Starmer, and he still obviously had an impact here.
I think it's like anytime Anna Sarwar was asked about it, the response was like, well, this election is in Scotland. What happens in Westminster means absolutely nothing in this election. But, we've seen now the result of that. The candidates who lost their seat are all coming out and saying it really did matter. And you kind of wonder, did we just need Anna Sarwar to keep emphasising that, to keep saying, we know that you do not like what has happened in Westminster. We know that you're going to take this election as a way to punish us for that. Instead of kind of distancing himself from that argument, did he have to say, because a large part of what did cut through with Scottish Labour and us was criticising 20 years of SNP government. But I think, unfortunately, when the UK government was elected on this mandate for change and then never delivered it, it's just like, you're not giving them much alternative. And I think ultimately that is where the voters just could not give their vote to Labour.
Completely. And actually, I remember the day before we could vote, I was in Hamilton with the First Minister, and there were people in the street, shouting 20 years of failure under the SNP, all of that. But then also, in contrast, there were people who were saying, I want to vote for the SNP. They would be the only party that I could vote for, but my faith in them isn't there anymore. So they don't even see, there are folk who don't even see Labour as an option. It's either SNP or no votes. Now, we've seen from the turnout, I just want to focus on the turnout slightly because it is quite interesting, because it has been a thing that, we've spoken about before. The turnout for this wasn't actually as low as we expected. I think it was around 53%.
Yeah, something like that.
If I'm right. We're not seeing record levels of turnout like, when the referendum was a big thing in 2014, but it's still in that sort of all right levels. It's dropped ever so slightly. And you do wonder that, with turnout dropping ever so slightly, where there may be voices who would be SNP supporters who've maybe fallen out with the SNP but don't see themselves backing parties like Anna Sarwar's purely because of the damage that the UK government has done, and Anna Sarwar, for them, not selling them convincing enough a message.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one party that did benefit from turnout and that kind of maybe disgruntlement with the SNP, it was the Greens. They made history, 15 MSPs, the most they've ever had, but also crucially as well, the first ever, but not just one, but two transgender MSPs, something that is really historic for the Scottish Parliament as well. But what do you take away from their kind of big result? Is it because people were kind of fed up with the SNP, do you think?
I think so. I think it's the sort of scunnered and meh effect that we spoke about before the election. And actually, when we look at the numbers a wee bit more, I'm just looking here, they've actually increased their vote share slightly, while the SNP has dropped. So they've clearly,
Is it a 10%?
Yes,
I think, in the Greens.
Exactly. And I think, when you look at places like Glasgow South Side, Edinburgh Central, they've clearly spoken for a lot of people here and won up significantly the SNP. You see Angus Robertson dropping to third when Lorna Slater wins.
They took seats off two, one cabinet secretary, Angus Robertson, as you say, and then also the Equalities Minister, Cocab Stewart, in the Glasgow South Side. So it's not just random seats. They've unseated major political figures.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're trying to show themselves now as we are no longer the small fringe Green Party.
Yeah.
We are key players in this, too shy of second place, 15 MSPs. That's significant for them. And they're going to use that in the Parliament to have a bit of momentum, to show that their voice is strengthening. And it's also part of, the Zach Polanski, Gillian Mackay, Ross Greer move towards populist party.
Yeah, and it being all about, the leader, and kind of back to the Nicola Sturgeon era, where there was this big figure who everyone knew and to an extent liked as well. It'll be interesting with the Greens, because they did do so well, how much power they hold in a minority administration with the SNP. I don't personally see any formal deal, because I think that the asks that the Greens will have, I think Gillian Mackay told you it would be like, universal free bus fares and childcare, I think it was.
That's it.
As much as they are policies that the SNP would align with, are maybe too costly for the SNP, and I think it would be better for them to do deals outside of a kind of Butte House 2.0. But I do think that the Greens, if they are going to do any sort of deal with the SNP, they are going to take a lot. They took they brought in a lot of changes to the budget and to previous government kind of pacts, and so I think we do have to expect to see that again.
And completely, and also they want to seem stronger as well as a party. They don't just want to be, we heard that Greens wagging the SNP dog. I can't quite remember the analogy, and I'm not going to try it. But basically that idea of the Greens having kind of decisions and overall kind of effect in the SNP, but also what their voter base was telling them, from what I've spoken to, Green sources about, is that they felt that they were kind of pushed a wee bit by the SNP, that their voters weren't happy with them. So they, in this next parliamentary term, will want to be carving out themselves as their own dominant party.
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I think, the Butte House agreement was the end of that was really tough for the Greens. They did take a bit of a hit, because, they sacrificed a lot in terms of climate targets. And so this time, as much as they want to be a part of, pushing through progressive policies, they also have to make sure that they're not sacrificing their core vote base, and really kind of pissing everyone off. I suppose they've got to keep everyone happy, I think. So it'll be interesting. What about the Lib Dems? It's a record number of MSPs for them as well. Alex Cole-Hamilton, the leader of the party, he'll be happy. They took gains from the SNP in Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch, which was held by Kate Forbes, who stood down. They also took Strathkelvin and Bearsden, and crucially lost a seat, Shetland, which had never not been held by the Lib Dems since 1999. So I wonder how much reflecting they will do on that, or whether they'll celebrate, just celebrate the gains of that.
Completely. I think, speaking to Lib Dem folk, I think they knew that Shetland wasn't always going to be a winning one. They were worried about it before, and I think they hoped that the gains in themselves would have made up for that. They will be disappointed with it though, and they will be disappointed also in Inverness and Nairn. I think they saw that as a place where they could make ground, but sadly they didn't. But still, the Lib Dems will be delighted with this result. 10 seats, it's, a really respectable win for them. But yeah, losing Shetland complicates that story slightly. It's not a completely clean win for them, but it's a respectable one, and they will be celebrating. I mean, we saw Alex Cole-Hamilton doing many photo ops with bottles of Prosecco or champagne, I'm not quite sure, but they'll be a happy bunch. Maybe still the last party, when we look at it, but for the Lib Dems, that's great. But the people who won't be super, super happy, I think I'll have to mention, are the Tories.
I was going to say, so although the Lib Dems are only have 10 MSPs, I think they'll probably be happier than the Tories.
Completely.
The Tories, there was some suggestion that they would get wiped out. They haven't been wiped out. I think their seats have been more than halved. I think they had like 31 in the last election, around that figure. And now they've got 12. There'll be some celebration, I think, from Russell Finlay, in that they held on to the constituencies that they really wanted. You know, they got that blue wall around the borders and Dumfriesshire, and they'll be really happy with that. I think they held on to Aberdeenshire West, and those are wins that the party will take. And so I think that probably secures Russell Finlay's job as well.
Yes, and we saw, you know, before all of this, there was kind of chat of if Jackson Carlaw and Eastwood held on to his seat, that could oust Russell Finlay. He didn't have to worry about that because Jackson Carlaw will be disappointed because he didn't take back his seat in Eastwood, which was seen as a bit of a kind of stronghold for him. You know, he spoke a lot for a lot of issues that the Jewish community raised in that area, which has the strongest or highest population of Jewish people in Scotland. So he will be, you know, disappointed in that result, seeing that as a bit of a kind of local stronghold for him. But yeah, it secured Russell Finlay, the leader. So maybe the party as a whole is quite thankful that all happened. But yeah, not a great result for Russell Finlay, going from the main opposition party down to just 12. Lots of kind of healing for that party to do. And
Absolutely.
I think for this parliamentary term, they're going to really have to work on their brand, their campaigning, their messaging, who the Scottish Tories are. They can't just completely rely on this. We're the party for common sense. They have to have
all the anti-independence.
Exactly.
I think the Tories will be another party kind of hoping that reform just self-destruct as well. But yeah, so that's really all we've got time for. But Hannah and I and Andrew and Kathleen, the other half of the politics team, we will all be in Holyrood this week as all the MSPs take their seats in the chamber. I think they'll make their oaths on Thursday. And so yeah, heraldscotland.com for all of that.